Ah, the Spanish flu of 1918, our favourite global pandemic nightmare, dusted off and paraded around every time a new crisis hits. But while we're all busy drawing parallels between then and now, there's another largely forgotten event from the early 20th century that deserves a bit of attention. The economic depression of 1920. Yes, 1920 had more to offer than just flappers and jazz, like a good old-fashioned blink-and-you-missed-it economic collapse. Now, you've probably heard plenty about the infamous crash of 1929, the Great Depression, and how we supposedly only crawled out of that one by fighting another world war. These days, with COVID-19 on everyone's mind,
It's a joke. It's all a joke.
it's easy to feel like we're teetering on the brink of a similar catastrophe. But wait, before you start stocking up on canned beans, let's take a quick detour through 1920, where we find an economic downturn that paints a very different picture. The end of World War I brought a brief moment of euphoria. High profits, high hopes, and probably some very high people. But with massive inflation, war debts, and the not-so-little problem of millions dying from the war and the flu, a serious economic correction was inevitable. Enter the Depression of 1920, stage left. Financial guru James Grant, author of The Forgotten Depression, 1921, The Crash That Cured Itself, not exactly beach reading, but stay with me, gives us some jaw-dropping numbers. The Federal Reserve's index of industrial production dropped by 31.6%. For comparison, during the 2007-09 crisis, it only fell by 16.9%. Grant even estimates that unemployment peaked at a staggering 15.3%. Things were so bad, wholesale prices plummeted 36.8%, so fast that even the Great Depression couldn't keep up. The Dow Jones? A roller coaster, plummeting 46.6%. It was ugly. Businesses were dropping like flies, profits vanished, and bankruptcy was the new black. But incredibly, everything rebounded. By August 1921, as the economist Benjamin M. Anderson said, we took our losses, readjusted, and started up again. Within 2 years, unemployment was back down to 2.4%, and the roaring 20s were off to the races. So, what magical trick did the government pull out of its hat to save the day? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. In fact, President Warren G. Harding's game plan was to slash federal spending and public debt, like a dad cancelling his kid's Netflix subscription. He declared in his 1920 campaign speech that it was time to tighten our belts, embrace thrift, and stop living like rock stars. And somehow, it worked. The federal budget dropped from $18.5 billion to $3.7 billion in just a few years, and public debt followed suit. James Grant cheekily calls this the crash that cured itself. But could the 1920s government have softened the blow? Maybe, but at what cost? Stagnation. History warns us with a cautionary tale from Japan, where an attempt to prop up prices in the 1920s led to 7 years of oppressive stagnation and a massive banking crisis in 1927. Not exactly a win, but precisely what you'd expect from big government intrusion. The 1920 Depression also came at a time when many Western bureaucrats thought state control of the economy, fresh off its wartime high, was the way of the future. That believed the answer involved central banks printing worthless money like there was no tomorrow. Inflating the money supply was the name of the game. In spite of the temptation to roll the presses, there were still lingering traces of that old-world liberalism where individuals and markets were trusted to fix themselves. In America, at least, that meant letting the market crash and burn, only for it to rise from the ashes like a particularly frugal phoenix. Fast forward to today, and the world has changed. Our economies are shaped by laws, institutions, and a cultural context vastly different from the laissez-faire days of the 1920s. But the forgotten Depression of 1920 still holds valuable lessons. It reminds us that sometimes people and communities can endure and overcome severe economic downturns through resilience, self-reliance, and a little less government intervention? Who knows? Maybe we need to dig into the past a bit more before rushing to print that next $1 trillion bailout.